Good morning, Breakfast with Bacon fans. If any of you is like me, you've read a lot of books on Padre Pio. For me, he's one of my favorite saints. So when Sophia Institute asked me if I would bring today's guest, Mary O'Regan, on, I was thrilled because she has recently written this book, Padre Pio. And wait, if you've read all those books, don't tune out because I will say, and I apologize to all the rest of you authors, they were great books. This is my favorite so far. And the reason it is because it's filled with that which Christ knew was the best teaching tools, was story after story after story of miracles of Padre Pio's lives, of how they apply to our life. It is literally one that is never, ever boring. My only regret is that I hadn't finished reading the book yet, but I will be soon. So Mary O'Regan, you sound like you're tuning all the way in from Ireland, but indeed you've moved to California and you're no longer in the Great Isle, are you?
Yes. No, I was born and raised in County Cork, Ireland, and I now live in Los Angeles, California.
And you are the only Irish person who's here to be a Lucky Charms spokesmodel, right?
Oh, yes, I joked with someone once that I was becoming a Lucky Charms spokesmodel, and they believed me.
I would
So,
too.
you know,
But our guest today does have to go to confession. Her only sin is she has yet not eaten a bowl of Lucky Charms.
that's true.
Horrors.
True.
So
That's
after
true.
this podcast, might you decide to try it?
Yes, you never know. You never know.
You never know. Well, Mary, thank you so much for coming on to the show. I did apologize to Mary before we went on the air that I hadn't finished reading her book. So that was my greatest regret. But as I was reading it in the pages and the chapters I was turning through, I was reading story after story, and I said, stop, stop. You got to get to this here. So, Mary, what caused you to write this book? And then I'm going to ask you, so I don't care if you answer one question before the other. This format, it is a very unique format. So what caused you to write it? What caused you that format?
Um, when you say format, you mean the structure?
Yeah, the stories, the way that it's just miracle after miracle after the things that really draw people in.
Well, originally, so I had to rewrite the book 3 times at least, and it took 8 years. And originally, it starts with my personal story, the introduction, and leading people in. And that was originally at the very end, sort of about the author,
Mhm.
but it just didn't work. And I had to reverse the order whereby my story came first, to lead people in and to bring them to the very same spot I was when I met Padre Pio. And I'm being very deliberate when I say met Padre Pio because he appeared to me when I was 14. And it happened in a click of the fingers when I was on vacation and someone just piped up randomly. We were that Padre Pio could bilocate. Someone piped up and said, Padre Pio could bilocate. And that means to be in two places at the same time and to serve two different people at the same time. And I had never heard the word Padre Pio, did not even know that Padre meant father, but instantly he was right there in front of me in a 6 by 10 cell, white walled, and he was wearing his brown Franciscan habit. So I knew he was a Franciscan priest, and he fixed me with this stare that riveted me to the spot. And he glowered at me with these coffee colored eyes, a piercing stare, and he had a white beard and a sort of a wreath of white hair, and these carmine lips that were drawn in a very serious and not exactly happy expression. He seemed displeased with me, and I knew he was. And he said, I am waiting for you. And I couldn't fathom this. I mean, why would a Franciscan priest just appear to me? This happened in rural Ireland, and he appeared to, a Franciscan priest just appearing in front of me in a white wall, 6 by 10 cell, and he had these brown gloves on him and these sort of little woolen mittens. And he was, I thought to myself at the time, this must be imagination. I'm just conjuring up what a Franciscan priest what I think Padre Pio would look like. Maybe it's fantasy, but it just there's no right way I could have ever forgotten it. And I just knew in my heart that whoever this Padre Pio was, he could bilocate. He could be in two places at once because the faith of the woman who said that brushed off on me. Then, a little while later, I was visiting a house and I was just looking through the bookshelves, and suddenly I saw a biography of Padre Pio, saw him on the cover, and said, "That's
The
him.
man you saw.
That's the Franciscan priest who appeared to me." So I gingerly picked it off the shelf, looked at it, and I
That's
found out that
awesome.
he had been a Franciscan priest, the second Saint Francis, and that he died in 1968. Now, he appeared to me as a child in the late 90s. And, this was 31 years after he had died. And I was very confused by it. So I started reading a little bit more about him on the biography. But Christine, I did not understand anything about it. Like it just gave a laundry list of his charisms, that he was a wonder worker. He could work miracles, healings, and that he was the second Saint Francis by way of having the stigmata. Saint Francis had the wounds of Christ, Padre Pio had the wounds of Christ, and that's why he had worn the brown mittens. And slowly it started to dawn on me that this could not have been imagination, could not have invented it. And um, this, again, I couldn't understand anything of the terms of art on the biography, mystical charisms like perfume, that the wounds gave off a special smell of roses and violets, that he could read hearts, minds, and souls
Yes.
and fly in the air. So I was like, I will never be able to understand this man. I will never be able to even read a biography about him. And I was so insecure that I just gingerly put the book back on the shelf for fear anyone would ask me, Amma, are you reading that? Because I didn't want to be discovered as someone who was so intellectually inept that I was never going to be able to understand these terms of art. And it started to dawn on me that maybe it hadn't been imagination, but it would take some years for me to understand fully the import of what happened and why he had not been why he had been so displeased with me when he appeared to me. You see, at the time, I was just very, very far from the faith, going through the motions like a typical Catholic school kid. And in Ireland, it's more even typical because you just get through the system. It's not a choice whether or not you go to Catholic schools. Most of the schools are Catholic, but they're nominally Catholic. And
Correct.
there's no way that any teacher would have mentioned Padre Pio because they would have literally risked their job in Ireland by teaching the kids about Padre Pio because so
What a
many
sad aside, isn't that? That you're teaching at a Catholic school and you'd anyway, keep going forward. That just makes me
true.
sad at the state of the church. In America, it's like that as well. They keep going.
It's so true. But I think in Ireland it's actually worse.
Mhm.
I do believe that. I was planning a life basically just of going the way of the flesh, promiscuity, boyfriends, and just being careerist and wanting to leave all practices of the faith behind as soon as I could, you know, get out of school. So he was displeased with me. That was the point at which I put the biography back on the shelf. And I thought that I would never read a biography about him, much less
Right
write a
one.
biography
Yeah.
about him. So I think that he has a bit of a sense of humor, does the Padre, because uh, he definitely took, how does one say, he definitely took a rough stone and polished it. So fast forward, I have a very sudden coming to Christ when I'm 15. Was struck by a truck in a strange accident. I just walked into traffic. An oncoming truck was coming, and I had a mystical encounter with Christ. And we, I came to Christ in the sense that I knew that Christ was the Savior. To that point, I had been extraordinarily resistant to Christ as the Savior, utterly rejected him. And
Wait, he appeared to you in this accident.
I
And
went up into the heavens and I was told that he was there in the white light, and I was shown a corridor of my life, what had happened and what was yet to happen. And he told me that I would be returned to Earth and have no injuries and not a scratch. Now that's kind of not normal. It was against physics because everyone, I could hear what they were saying on the ground simultaneously, even though I was unconscious.
Okay.
Oh, has she committed suicide? She's dead. She'll be paralyzed for life. And so many different people had gathered around and around the accident, and they were wailing. There was people, it was a very, very serious situation. But when I got to the hospital, I had no injuries.
And yet you walked further from Christ?
I didn't walk further from Christ. I embraced Christ utterly at that moment, and it became more and more like when someone received Holy Communion and they hadn't told anyone, I would feel the same presence in that person as I
Okay.
had it there. I feel the same presence that I had when I actually met Christ in the heavens.
So
And
sorry, I'm sure you could keep talking. I have this feeling, and this is not in any way to stroke your ego or your
no,
pride.
no, no.
But
What?
for me, my comments are meant to not do that. But I sit here and think, because I read the story here about you meeting Padre Pio, and I think, wow. For me, that is similar to meeting the Fatima seers because the Blessed Mother chose to speak to them. You had not one, but two. You had a saint appear to you as well as the King of the universe.
Oh,
Uh,
well, I would never have expected it. I mean, I was just the sort of person who people would say, oh, everyone's going to heaven. And I was just like, no, everyone else is going to
sure.
heaven. Everyone else is going to heaven. I am absolutely not going to heaven.
Did you ever figure out why they're talking to you, though? And that might come into why this is written, right? Why you?
Well, Christine, I'd like to do this in a linear way, but
Okay.
I'm only talking about the handful of experiences I've had. I mean, I really can't understand what happens to a wretched sinner. I'm serious because I hold
Yes.
myself in very, very low repute. But something had happened in my early childhood that had made me pull away from Christ totally and had made me, well, just put me in a state of not knowing. So I'm not making this up in any way, shape, or
Yeah, I
form, and
don't
it's
think so.
definitely not imagination because I do not want to be in the clutches of the creatures who appeared to me when I was a 4-year-old. So when I was a 4-year-old, I was in the house of a very old person, and I was just in a room full of old antiques, and suddenly I had an apparition of the demonic. And with all my soul, I mean it. The devil was right in front of me. I was 4, and his minions were right around me, like terrifying, shadowy black bodyguards. And suddenly the devil caught me by the shoulders and pushed me. No exaggeration, because he pushed me like a vending machine going back and forth. And I remember him saying to me, I will do everything I can to obstruct what you are about to do.
Wow.
And I just was terrified. I was in fight or flight. You know that because I mean these things happen. I mean, there's no way I would have had any instruction. Most people balk at the idea of telling a 4-year-old, that there's this demon, there's this fallen angel
Yes.
called, because you can't, there is a time when you have to tell a child and it's later. So I just felt very unprotected. I was 4. I didn't know what to do in such a situation of actual attack. And when at various times in my childhood I called on the name of Christ, I didn't feel any protection or presence. But that can happen. The Lord can lead someone through a period of darkness and dryness. And that happened very much in my childhood. Didn't feel the presence of Christ at all or of the Lord, felt only rejection. And that the Lord can do that to people, and He can bring them as a child through darkness and dryness. And after the apparition of the devil and these creatures that were behind me that were so terrifying, I remember seeking out one adult and saying to them, "Look, is this person called the devil real? And will he say things like this to me?" And they looked ashen, and I said, "Oh yes, but he's there. He appeared to me." And it was like this was normal. I thought this was happening to every other child. And they said, "Oh, he's real and he's out to get you." But this only furthered me into like fight or flight. And if the symptoms of heart are fight or flight, are natural. They'll happen to
Sure.
various people. Heart starting pounding and head going extremely dizzy and feeling like I was just going to pass out. Then I asked another adult that I trusted very deeply, and she said, "No, the devil, that's only fairy tale. That's only imagination." And this, even though it was an untruth, it calmed me. And I went with the idea of what was going to relieve my fight or flight. And then 10 years later, when Padre Pio appears to me, I'm considering, is this just imagination? Then, when I got struck by a truck and came back just totally healed from what had happened.
Any potential death or injuries, every
Yes.
potential death or
And
injuries. Mhm.
and I didn't tell anyone about it because this is the truth. I didn't want people to think I was hearing things or going to the imagination. I remember that the doctors asked me, said, this is not quite normal, the doctors, but they were delighted at the same time that they didn't have to deal with a
Slice
body.
you open and clean up your internal wounds, right?
They were delighted. They just looked like they were just going to go on vacation. And I
So you're
just
about 24-ish at this point.
No, I was 15. It was a year after
It
Padre
was a
Pio.
year after that. You said 10 years after. Okay.
So Devil appears to me when I was four,
Or Padre
intense
Pio at 14.
at 14. And between the Devil appearing and Padre Pio, intense spiritual dryness with a few exceptions. And got struck by a truck at 15 and come to Christ and make a few decisions then, going to stay chaste till marriage, and I'm going to try and give my life increasingly to Christ. But it's a process because I didn't quite give him as much as I was called to do, kind of holding things back for myself. But that never worked out. So I had to learn through suffering that it's just better to give everything to Christ and do his will. And then after I did that, there was the second and final encounter, direct encounter, just as like I'm meeting you with Padre Pio when I was 17. I was just looking at a picture of him, and there he was again. But this time he was smiling, he was joyful, and he told me he loved me. And then he said, "Praise be Jesus." And he led me in saying, "Praise be Jesus." And that was my way of knowing when I was researching the book. Because sometimes when I started researching the book, I still didn't really understand things that had happened to me growing up. I understood them later. And Padre Pio, as a young priest, when he was only 24, had a string of very serious demonic apparitions. Um, and I believed them wholly because at least they were similar to what had happened to me as a 4-year-old. But Padre Pio had various the Satan came in various guises. He came as Padre Pio's best friend. He came as Padre Pio's spiritual father. He even came as Saint Francis. And Padre Pio's way of knowing that the devil was trying to take on a guise and fool him momentarily was to ask the devil to say, "Praise be Jesus." And suddenly he would disappear in a black cloud of smoky sulfur.
So when he asked you to say praise be Jesus,
Then
you
later,
knew that.
when I was researching the book, I knew it was genuine because the devil, if it had been the devil, then if the devil coming as Padre Pio, because if he can come as Saint Francis, he could potentially use his power to come as Padre Pio. But the fact that Padre Pio led me in that, I just knew the devil wouldn't do that. So it must have been a genuine encounter. And I could never find a picture that looked like the second apparition, the second meeting I had with Padre Pio.
Yeah,
Um,
I was going to say, because you rarely see pictures of him smiling. It's always that serious, that stop sinning kind of look.
Yeah, I know that look.
Yeah.
Oh, do I know that look, Christine? And this time he was very joyful, but he was
Was more
glory,
like that.
more like that, but glory, more like that. Yeah, and that's the one I was hoping that he would go with. We would go with that one, and we did. And he was gloriously beautiful, like just heart-throbbingly handsome, and he was just you just felt that feeling you feel when you've met a movie star. And but I realized then I didn't know quite why he was so incredibly beautiful, but then I had to learn more about the glorified bodies in heaven, like
Transfiguration.
yeah, like the Transfiguration, which we're about to celebrate tomorrow, August 6th. So he appeared as that, like his face shone like the sun. It was just couldn't. And again, later I thought to myself, this can't be imagination. There's no way you could actually conjure this up.
So you have to be careful who you share that with too, because I would think that people, because I look at you and again, I'm thinking you are, again, I'm not trying to stroke your ego, but there's something very special about you that not one, not two, but three different appearances of people. So God is putting a very clear um, responsibility on you, and and saying, "I'm speaking to you."
Mm.
I wonder where you would have been, for instance, had the Lord not allowed Padre Pio to visit you, had the Lord Himself not taken you to heaven. You already suggested what your life may have been, but what a gift! So, at what point after that? And did you have some kind of massive conversion? Like, I'm devoting my life to God. I need to write this book. To maybe still take it slowly. When did this start materializing more like, you know, this needs to be done? This is my mission.
Well, it was more of a process. It came part by part. In particular, me not giving my will to the Lord, because I knew Jesus was Jesus. And when after my encounter with him above, and he he had to deal with me trying to bargain with him a lot. This is what I want, and I'm going to pray so much, I'm going
You're going
to
to
get
give it to
my
me.
way. I'm going to get my way. I'm going to hang out with these people. I'm going to try and date this boy. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And eventually I just had to decide that the Catholic Church was absolutely true in all its teachings as the spotless bride of Christ. And it was a process. And I came to I was so what the calling came very much from the fact that I started researching about Padre Pio online, having no one had actually properly told me about him except for the fact that that woman said Padre Pio could bilocate. That's the only thing I knew. So I started researching about him online, and I started writing a blog with a lot of entries on Padre Pio. And I was surprised by how much a reaction they were getting, how many people were in touch. I became very good friends with Frank Riga, who wrote Padre Pio in America. Me and Frank have been friends for 15 years. God bless him. He's been my mentor. And he also introduced me to Jeanette Salerno, another lady. We've been friends for a long time. And she met Padre Pio and was with him for a while in the 1960s.
Wow.
She had a personal meeting with him in person. And Jeanette is a very dynamic, incredibly multi-talented person. And Frank is just a total brain box. And they've led me over many years. And what happened was is that I kept trying to do more secular journalism. So I went to London and I was a journalist for 10 years while
Mhm.
simultaneously having the blog. It's just called Mary's Blog. And
Which, of course, there's a link right below in the show notes if you guys want
oh,
to go read
great.
it. Yeah.
Yay.
Yes. So keep going. So you wrote about Mary's blog. You're
I
back in London.
kept writing about Padre Pio. And anyone who writes about Padre Pio, you're going to encounter two extremes, if I just may be honest. You're going to encounter, on one side, if I may, a lot of hate and a lot of anger, and a lot of people getting very angry talking about Padre Pio's anger.
Hmm.
Sorry. And I mean, just one encounter I had, just it's a small encounter. I was having a meeting with a group in London, and I was, we're having a social event, and a fellow that I met was so angry about the post that I was writing that he kind of just put a slice of chocolate into my lap like this. Was like just this aggressive move to kind of accidentally on purpose throw chocolate cake on my lap.
Oh, he literally, like in real life, threw
Literally,
chocolate.
just passive aggressive, just like true chocolate cake on my lap, and was complaining that Mary's posts on Padre Pio don't deserve she doesn't deserve the stats she's getting on her blog. She doesn't deserve the fondness for Padre Pio, etc. And that was one encounter. And again, it was real and it was physical. And I remember thinking that it was a tiny, tiny taste of what had happened to me as that little 4-year-old who had no clue who the devil was. He introduced himself and said, I will do absolutely everything to stop you. And again, that's a very negative reaction to some posts, but then it's been absolutely ultimately positive. I've made some wonderful, wonderful friends, and I've gotten to know the faith so well by way of writing about Padre Pio. And I feel I've been blessed, most especially with my own conversion, because yes, it might be a compliment that he appeared to me, but also I was that lost sheep. And Jesus goes in search of the lost sheep. And I was that person because I would never have even asked how to become a spiritual child of Padre Pio. I would never have even looked into him had he not intervened so spectacularly.
Wow. I could ask you more just about your life and forget all about the book, but I do need to tell people about the book.
Oh,
Uh,
please do.
you guys must be jealous of me because I get to talk to Mary O'Regan after we go off the air, and I got a lot more questions there. But I read, so it's broken into chapters about different kinds of stories on him, stories of mercy, stories of blindness, stories of whatever. So in my mind, I was thinking, ask her about her favorite story. And I thought, no, that's going to be impossible. What are some, I'll give you plural, of some of the stories that to you were so powerful that they stuck with you, that you're like, my fingers were tickling as I wrote this because it was touching my heart and mind.
Well, Padre Pio was a wonder worker, and his holiness meant that he could heal people by way of pure gift of the Holy Spirit. So he did that by praying for different people to get the grace. And as regards miraculous healing, excuse me, miraculous healings, I'll tell you about the thread of miraculous healings that are probably most edifying and most instructive, especially for our day and age, and that is the healing of people from blindness.
Mhm.
And Padre Pio could see grace, and he could see if a grace was on offer for the person to be healed from blindness. So a blind man came to Padre Pio, and he said to Padre Pio, if I could just be healed in one eye, then I'll be happy. One eye. So Padre Pio says, yes, the grace is on offer, and I'll pray for you to be healed in one eye. Man is delighted. He suddenly has a miraculous healing, and he's completely cured in one eye. But he comes back to Padre Pio's friary and he sees a man who was completely blind in both eyes. And he had asked Padre Pio for miraculous healing and he had been cured in both eyes. And he says to Padre Pio, why did you cure him in both eyes and not me, only me in one? And Padre Pio looked at him and says, you only asked for healing in one eye. Never put limits on God. And he told him that you could have been healed in both eyes if you'd asked. Simultaneously to that, around the same time, there was a Jewish man from Florence. I had a lot of correspondence with the Jewish community about this case, and his name was Raffaello or Lello. And he came to Padre Pio and asked, I'd love to be healed from my blindness. I've tried every medical intervention and it has all failed. And Padre Pio said, get light for your soul, and then light will come back to your eyes. So he instructed the man to be baptized. And the man, Lelo went and was baptized and was completely healed of his blindness, which baffled the doctors. And then there was another case, again, simultaneously to those cases, where there was a man who was very devoted to Padre Pio. His name was Pietro. Pietro was a very dearly beloved assistant to Padre Pio, but he had gone blind when he was 12. And he went to Padre Pio and said, is the healing grace for a miraculous recovery of my eyesight available? And Padre Pio says, yes, whenever you want it, the grace is available. But he said, whatever is good for my soul. And Padre Pio said, you are very, very blessed that you do not see the sin and filth of this world. And Padre Pio asked him again, do you want that miraculous healing? And Pietro said, no. If it's not going to be good for my soul to have my eyesight restored, then I won't. And then he lived a humble life. He was a highly intelligent chap, but he did errands for the friars. He was very trusted by Padre Pio because he minded Padre Pio's mail. Regrettably, people were trying to pinch Padre Pio's mail and sell it.
Mm.
So I know, but and I see myself in those people sometimes. Don't worry. Sorry.
Don't we all? It's only the arrogant person who's not willing to admit what a sinner they are. But yeah, Yeah, I get it.
And Pietro was a great example to a lot of people who came to Padre Pio because he had decided to forfeit a miraculous healing and to
See?
stay single because he couldn't provide for a family, potentially with his blindness. And there were other cases of that where people decided to stay away from a miraculous healing, particularly for blindness. Because this is a quote from Padre Pio that really cuts to the heart, Christine. And it's not available anywhere at this moment in time in a published book, except for this one, because I felt I had to do it. It really touches a nerve when people hear it. But Padre Pio said this: the eye is the organ that brings us into the most sin. And that is as true for men who struggle with pornography as it is for women who struggle with envy when they're seeing someone's posts on Instagram that are especially, someone who's especially gorgeous, and, that feeling of
Or that
wanting to.
Gucci purse that I want to buy,
Oh, yeah,
you know? But it's true, right? It's a different sin, but it's still coming in through the eye. I
it's
want
still
what they
coming
have.
into the eye. And that's something we must bear in mind. So that's the thread of miracles that are most important for me regarding seeking a miraculous healing versus not. And there was also, if I'll finish on this miracle,
Is this
there
the
was,
one where the eye was blown in and it wasn't even an eye on
yes.
the tell that one. I was hoping that you would tell that one.
Okay, so there was a man called Giovanni Savone and his lovely wife Francesca, and Giovanni was so pious that Padre Pio used to tease him. Only for a little bit did you lose your vocation to the priesthood. If you'd only started coming to see me sooner, Giovanni. Sorry, those neighbors are.
We can't hear it.
Oh,
We
good.
can't hear
Thank
any
God.
of it.
Thank God. Okay, I'll start again there. Padre Pio used to tease Giovanni. Only for a little bit did you miss a vocation. If you had started coming to me sooner, then you'd be a priest now, but now you're married. He used to tease Giovanni. But Giovanni was a laborer and he was about to go out to use dynamite to blast some rocks. And Padre Pio said, I am praying for you this morning that you do not get killed, Giovanni. So Giovanni was perplexed by this. He was a laborer. He was just about to do his job of blasting some rocks with dynamite. And he went out to the garden nonetheless, blasted the rocks, and suddenly a charge of dynamite blew up in his face and blasted his eyes. And he was in hospital, and the doctor said there's really very little, there's no hope. The eyes are completely pulverized, there's no hope. Padre Pio said, I offer one of my eyes for Giovanni because he's a man with a family. And he appeared to Padre Pio appeared at Giovanni's bedside and said to Giovanni, um, how may I help you? And Giovanni said, I can't live like this. I do need my sight restored. And his sight was restored in the eye that was most pulverized. There's absolutely no way, no scientific way that Giovanni would have been able to see out of it. And when the cure came, Giovanni had a mystical smell of tobacco and it soothed him. And then there was another little miracle, I think a little miracle with
Well,
his
hold
wife.
on. I just want to make sure it's clear about that one
Oh, yes,
because you made it very clear in the book. The eye remained pulverized. It looked
completely.
scarred, and there was no way people could understand how he could see out of that eye, which is really what got me because the doctor's like, well, maybe you're seeing out of this eye, and you think, and they, covered up, and it's like literally he was seeing out of this eye was as if looking through flesh and he was still seeing. And that to me is again the glory of God. It's like, don't
No.
tell me I have to do it a certain way. Just like the other story with the pupil, the girl that had no pupils, and yet her healing was stored. The pupils never came, but she was
Yes,
able to see. I mean, so I love those stories.
yes. And this the concerned Gemma di Giorgi, and she was a little girl from Sicily, and she was born with no pupils. Her eyes were like chocolate dots, and she could not see at all. And when she was on the way, her aunt and her mother took her to see Padre Pio. And when she was on the way to Padre Pio, she started pointing out things to them. her eyesight started to return, started to come miraculously. She said, "Oh, that's a ship." And her mother was confused, like, how is my daughter suddenly seeing? So she went to Padre Pio, and Padre Pio asked her a few questions and said, "You're ready to receive your Holy Communion. Now you may receive your Holy Communion." And her eyesight was completely restored. And people would come to Padre Pio then in droves, wanting miraculous healings, and they would say, "You cured the girl who is still legally blind. She has no pupils, and she can see perfectly." And he said, "Don't bring me into this. That was Our Lady. Our Lady interceded for her to get that grace." And then they said, "But you were the one who asked Our Lady."
I love that humility. When I read that, I thought I need to get better at that. You know, I think we tend to take credit for the things that God does through us. God
Yeah.
uses me to save marriages. And I've had many people praise God through his grace, say, "You've saved our marriage. You know, you caused a miracle in our marriage." And I'm like, God chose me to be that vessel. It was no gift of my own. He could have chosen Mary O'Regan. He could have chosen someone else. So it is getting better. Going, please don't point to me. Just praise God that he put that in me, and I have to use those gifts, which is what Padre Pio was doing. I have to use the gifts that God gave me. So I think his healings on blindness are some of the most famous. But what were some, because I'm going to make them read the book, but what were some other chapters that you think, I mean, I could just go through here.
Ask
Again, I
any
love the way you put it through, you know, the fiery conversions. I'm sorry, I'm speaking the wrong way. I love the way that you structured it, because every chapter is engaging and it's not just written like a biography. So anyway, what other things touch you? And then I swear we'll just move on to the,
Ask anything. What's particularly on your heart, Christine? Anything.
that's what's on my heart, because I didn't get to finish reading the book. And so I loved what, so for instance, I think there was a chapter on, was it mercy? Here's one, Padre Pio and the popes. I mean, okay,
Ah,
go ahead.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yes.
I just loved looking at the chapter headings, and then I'd start reading through the, you know, those chapters, which I didn't read them all. And I thought, wow, this is amazing stuff I'd never heard. That's kind of where my mind is.
Okay. Well, um, I'll segue into Padre Pio and the popes by way of talking about the fact that personally I hold the greatest of Padre Pio's miracles were the conversions of souls. So when he's still a young priest, he suddenly becomes extremely famous by way of the miraculous healings being known in the press and the fact that a doctor, a very celebrated doctor, examined the stigmata, the fact that Padre Pio was bearing the wounds of Christ most visibly in his palms, pierced
Mm-hmm.
through, looked like a carmine crust around a dime-sized piercing on both palms. And the doctor who examined him, the report got that this doctor wrote on Padre Pio, where he hailed the stigmata as being a miraculous gift, whereby Padre Pio was a living exhibition of Christ's wounds. He hailed it as miraculous, and it got leaked to the press. So just as Padre Pio is getting very famous, he's attracting a number of souls who seem to be hopeless cases. People who are coming out of curiosity sometimes, or because they just have an insatiable call, even though their lifestyles are anything but laudable. So one case in particular is Emanuele Brunato. And Emanuele at that time was about the same age as Padre Pio. He was 27. He was a con man. He had been cheating people out of money for some time, and he had left his wife, and he was living among prostitutes in a most foul area. And he read about Padre Pio in the press and decided, okay, I've got to see this man. But he had been found out as a con man and had lost all his money. So went part of the way there by train, and then he had to get off and walk the whole night to get to Padre Pio. So he arrived to the friary garden just as dawn was breaking, and he saw Padre Pio and had a very bad reaction because Padre Pio, like he did to me, did not look with pleasure upon Emanuele. And I
Mm-hmm.
understood that perfectly when Emanuele was reliving what had happened to him.
Right.
And he said Padre Pio had a bandit's face. And He ran from him and then he ran back. And Padre Pio heard his confession, and Emanuele just sobbed like a baby. And when he was about to hear his confession, Padre Pio said, "Start from the war." So during the war that had just happened a few years before, Emanuele had confessed his sins then, and Padre Pio said, "The Lord put a big boulder over your sins to that point. And don't try and move that boulder, whatever you do, but tell me the sins that you
Since
committed
then.
since then." And Emanuele then knew that Padre Pio was truly a wonder worker because no one knew that he had confessed during the war. And Emanuele then converted utterly, totally. But he was a very, very clever person who showed who showed extraordinary elan in evading Padre Pio's most powerful enemies. Because with Padre Pio's fame, and especially with the people that he was converting, he gathered more and more enemies. The higher the number of conversions that happened with Padre Pio, the
Yeah.
greater the enemies that he was amassing. So regrettably, Padre Pio, there were his enemies who tried to curtail his ministry to stop him from reaching people like Emanuele, and they were sometimes very close to the Pope. So, in fact, in one case, when Padre Pio is a young pope, is a very
Friar.
young priest,
Mhm.
it is the Pope's best friend. The Pope, it was Pope Pius XI, and he had a best friend, Father Gemelli, who was a psychologist and a medical doctor, and had a past as a communist activist. He'd been arrested certain times in his youth before his own conversion. I can't speak to the genuineness of his conversion. I take it on face value. He said that he had a conversion. He became best friends with Pius XI, and he lied about Padre Pio. He said that he'd examined the stigmata. He had never examined the stigmata, and he caused Pius XI to have Padre Pio's ministry all but curtailed, to have Padre Pio defrocked, in fact. But it was Emanuele that kept hounding the Vatican and kept using, I suppose,
And
dirty
Emanuele,
tactics.
again, that's the doctor that examined the hand, right?
Oh no, sorry. Emanuele Brunato is the man who had been a con man, who
Okay,
converted in
right,
Padre
right.
Pio's confessional after he read about Padre Pio in the press, after details of Padre Pio's stigmata and miracles got leaked to the
Got it.
press.
Okay.
So um, it was
So the
Emanuele.
Pope's best friend is speaking poorly of Padre Pio, and this ex-con man is speaking well of him. Okay.
Absolutely. And it was really Emanuele who brought the Vatican to heel because he started digging up dirt on the Vatican prelates who were trying to bring Padre Pio's ministry to a halt. And how does one say, the ethics of this are questionable. But he said he started, and he could not be sued because he was reporting so accurately that he was saying, these hives of
This wolf in sheep's clothing is doing this, and this wolf in sheep's clothing is doing that, right? Yeah.
and then they bought up all the copies of his book, but he wouldn't stop. Um, so there
Printing
was
it.
all this sort of thing that would happen, and in all the cases throughout Padre Pio's life, Emanuele would always try to do something like that to show up the hypocrisy of trying to bring someone like Padre Pio to heal when they had in-house situations that weren't being dealt with in any way as severely as they were treating the stigmatist Padre Pio.
And I just keep thinking so many of you out there have heard. I can't be the only one that's in love with this saint. And so you must have heard many of these things, but there's so many other things like I hadn't heard that are in this book that why did you feel that the structure was good instead of being autobiographical? Was it the reason that I said it's like these stories they capture us? When did you decide, or did the Lord tell you, or were you like, this is just how I have to do this because that was it? that that pulls you in.
Well, it took
8 years, right?
8 years, and actually kept having to rewrite the book on the basis that I would find another story that needed to be put in. And also, there were various little graduations that I had in writing the book, and that was that I realized that Padre Pio's popularity depended a lot, and his freedom to practice his ministry depended a lot on the esteem in which the ruling pope held him. If the ruling pope held him in good esteem and quietened the people who were lying about him, then times were good for Padre Pio. But
Mm.
if the Pope held Padre Pio in suspicion and was more open to listening to Padre Pio's enemies, then times were very, very bad for Padre Pio, and that's when he had his major persecutions. But I wanted to make it a book about a story of many saints. Some of the worst people who were living the worst lives became the best saints in Padre Pio's life, who helped him the most. And I mean that goes. There was even the conversion of a priest who had done some of the worst to Padre Pio and Padre Pio's family. And this priest who had attacked Padre Pio and attacked Padre Pio's family had an extraordinary conversion.
You're not going to tell us about it now
Oh
because we
yeah.
need to read it. No,
Okay.
no, no, we should let them read it because I don't want to give the whole book away. It is one of those that I think is, to be honest, can be read to your family. I think this is one, and I know we don't do that enough, Mary, anymore,
True.
but
True.
that family time together where we
True.
read stories, tell stories. This is a kind of book I think that can go into that place because the Lord spoke to you when you were 4. Well, he allowed the devil to appear to you, right?
Yeah.
Children can handle much more than we think they can.
Oh,
Our
yeah.
Blessed
True.
Mother appeared to children, showed them heaven, hell, and purgatory. So I have a girlfriend. She is a script writer, a movie writer. She actually, helped, but she didn't help, but Mel Gibson in The Passion of the Christ, she went and met with him and actually gave advice on things to do and stuff. So I mean, she was a Hollywood producer, and I said to her, "You need to write a movie," because she's currently writing one, this what's written adventure movie about the three kings, and it's exciting. I said, my mind, if I could do what she can do, is to do a superhero movie with various saints. You got Padre Pio, and you've got Joan of Arc, and you've got, and then have them save the world. Well, because that's really what we get from hearing the stories of the saints. They're just regular human beings who, through God's amazing grace, in many cases did superhuman things in changing souls, winning winning hearts, getting people from hell to heaven. And so I think people should be exposed to this book for the story element, but also for an understanding in, if you trust God, what he can do for your life as well, because
Mhm.
you're a perfect example of that. Look what he
Yeah.
did in your
Oh
life.
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh
So,
yeah.
I
Oh yeah.
mean, before I ask you that question, I told you I was going to ask you about
Yes.
the action item. What is one more thing you wanted to say about this book that I may not have asked about yet that you think people should know?
Well, I'd just like to draw attention, going from one thing to another, to your devotion to Joan of Arc. And we know that Joan of Arc, again, saints appeared to her, and she won the battles for Catholic France. She actually went into battle. One of Padre Pio's enemies was against the canonization of Joan of Arc. So again, that's just one example.
Ryan. Hmm.
But
People who fight for the faith.
the one thing I'd like to say, and this leads into what I may give as the action item, is that the book really, what I've tried to go for, I've tried to grab the devil by the horns. And I've tried to say that even the ones who seem most in Satan's grasp, we see this time and time again. Another example is that there was someone who had a lapse in their conversion. She converted and had a wonderful conversion with Padre Pio, and then she fell away. and perjured herself against Padre Pio, gave false testimony, and then on her deathbed she withdrew her false statement, her false deposition, and she converted utterly again. So she converted, had a very bad fall that nearly got Padre Pio in the worst type of trouble. And then she converted on her deathbed, and Padre Pio said that she'd gone to heaven because
Mm.
he said that her act of perfect love in, having to humiliate herself and show herself to be a public liar, and then withdrawing and saying that no, my testimony wasn't genuine, I lied, and then showing her, putting herself forward as a public sinner and converting, perfect conversion on her deathbed, perfect confession, and then Padre Pio said she's gone to heaven. And the action item, if I may, is only if you feel called. Only if you feel called. Potentially, if you feel called and if you feel the Lord is leading you this way, potentially give the book to someone you feel is in potentially the worst situation. Now, we can't judge in other people. I will never have the ability to read souls. Padre Pio could read souls, but that person who tempts you to despair. And some categories may include if you have a husband or a wife with narcissistic personality disorder, with addiction issues. We also have that. That's a new thing that I bring to the table. Someone who was post-abortion, who had a drug problem. Padre Pio totally led the person in total conversion and total healing, totally off their drugs after they had discovered true contrition and confession. That person, give it to them and just say, look, I'd like you to read this about this man, Padre Pio, and see what you think. Now, this is something I'm not going to ask anyone to do this. It's a matter for your personal discernment if you feel that this is something you would do. But your action item, if you're battle ready, is to give it to that person, anyone in your life, including maybe someone from your past who you may need to make amends, who you feel needs to make amends with you, or if indeed you are someone who has not been forgiven by someone, if you have done a wrong to someone and they won't forgive you, happens a lot, happens more than most of us, including myself, will admit, potentially invite them to introduce them to Padre Pio, and you would be surprised what may happen. I have seen extraordinary things. I am continually blown away by the way that it is those that are the lost sheep, as indeed was I, who are the ones who will come most, because they're the ones who sometimes have suffered on the dark side. They
Yeah.
know the devil and his wiles. They know different things about the dark side of human nature and their own dark side, and they just want something, some catalyst for their conversion. And it could just be becoming a
Yeah.
spiritual son or daughter of Padre Pio. And that's where I detail ultimately in the book all the ways that you can become a spiritual child, a spiritual son or daughter.
You know what I also liked is that at the end of each section, there were these questions. You would
Oh,
ask them to consider this. What if this? Have you done that? And that surprised me because while I love the stories, I thought, fantastic. I always end my shows the same way, which is what I told you. Name one thing you'll have our viewers do differently as a result of something they heard today. Because I learned a long time ago as a public speaker, don't let people just listen to you and go, oh, that was great and feel good. If you don't give them something to do differently as a result of what they've just heard, they'll forget and they'll not be changed. So when you put that in there, that's the same strategy I use is, okay, you've read this. How are you going to be different? How is this going to impact you? That was brilliant in my perspective,
oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank
actually.
you.
Was that your thought? I guess I shouldn't ask you, right? If someone helped you, you did it. That it's just necessary. It's good, and it's going to get the average person to think through things they may not have thought about.
Yes, and I failed very badly in many ways in my personal life when I was writing the book, but it humbled me to the point where I could not hold myself in any way above anyone who was going to read the book. And I felt very much that there had been a bit of a dichotomy in other things that have been written about Padre Pio, in that he's the great saint. We can't ever approach him in holiness. And in fact, it's some of the worst of us, myself most foremost, who can develop our holiness. And Padre Pio talked to everyone about their state in life. He talked to married people a little bit differently than he talked to people in religious life. And that's something I want to bring out very much. He spoke to people according to their vocation. And um, whatever state of life you're at, you may find some special piece of advice that's just for you.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question I wasn't going to ask, but how are you a better
Sorry.
person because of this book?
What?
How are you a better person because of having written this book?
Oh gosh, oh my word, that would we'd be here all day.
Okay.
Uh, we'd be here all day, but it has um just that there was various stages in the book when Padre Pio would not let me go further unless I converted in that certain way that he wanted.
Mm.
Things would happen where the book just became impossible. And then I would say, okay, Padre Pio, lead me here, what do you want? Definitely, totally and utterly far more forgiving. Just want to give myself entirely to total forgiveness. Like a lot of people, I've had to make distance from people who are potentially persisting and hurting me. And it's better for me and it's better for them if they don't have the occasion of sin. In particular, people who have really, really maligned Padre Pio. Um, my spiritual director had to tell me to cut off contact with one religious who was being very vindictive about the Padre Pio book. And it was just taking my peace. It was leading me to despair. And I wanted to be the prideful person who can move their heart. It wasn't going to happen through me, it made it happen to someone else. So that's
Yeah.
one thing about that. uh, as a layperson, there's only so much I can do. I can't have that pride of thinking that I can help people when I can't. I can only do what I can do as just a writer who prays. And there's also the ways in which I became much more devoted to Our Lady, because whatever state of life you're in, Padre Pio was he was unequivocal, he was categorical and uncompromising about how much we need to be devoted to Our Lady. You know, he would say things as the Immaculate Conception was the first step on the route to our conversion, to our salvation. Excuse me. The Immaculate Conception was the first step in salvation history. So he also said that, you know, pray the rosary every day, just like the children of Fatima were told to pray the rosary every day. And he told us to love Our Lady, make her loved. And he said something that isn't available very much. It's not available online except through this book, and hopefully other people will take the message from this book and put it online. Is that he said that as we can only make good confessions if we are properly devoted to Our Lady, because he said that God is merciful only when he sees Our Lady will wash our rags.
Wow, that's a good place to stop because I'm already now thinking of my own confessions. I'm like, my confessions are weak. I can't remember my sins. I really want to know my sins. I want to know my sins of omission. And you just gave me my own selfish personal little answer there. So I'm like, I'm going to
But I
stop
might
and
add,
ponder.
I'll add
Huh?
one last thing. I'll add one last thing.
Oh, go ahead.
One very last thing. Padre Pio told his own mother, who was worried that she wasn't remembering everything in confession, he said, God's mercy is so great that he will even cover the sins that we genuinely can't remember.
Amen. Amen. Okay, they can get this book. You guys can get this book at sophiainstitute.com. The link is in the show notes. And as I say on these shows that I do, I know you maybe sometimes can get books cheaper on Amazon or whatever, but it's so good to go through the publishing houses for the sake of Catholic publishing, for the sake of um, giving the money. Okay. Hmm. I don't want to disparage anything, but those big box stores, we don't always know them. So I like supporting our Catholic agencies and knowing that it's good and true and the money's going to a good place. So, and they're the ones that help spotlight authors like Mary O'Regan here who are trying to do the Lord's work. So get it wherever you can. But the book is called Padre Pio and You, an epic story of spiritual fatherhood. And it is, again, the best Padre Pio book I've written, and I've only gotten less than halfway through it. So I think you guys should do it as well. Also, you can follow Mary if you want to go to her blog, because as she said at the beginning, this started out with her blog, and that is The Path Less Taken 7. And you call that, what do you call that? Mary's blog or
Mary's blog.
Mary's blog. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. And I'm guessing they can reach out to you there. They can comment on your blogs and things and stuff. If they have any direct questions or comments, it's a good place to get a hold of you.
That would be wonderful.
Okay. And also, if you want to follow me, go to breakfastwithbacon.com. I mean, you can also go to drchristinebacon.com, but you spell out doctor, D-D-D-R, is there a period? It's easier just to go for Breakfast with Bacon. When I was on the radio for a decade, everybody was like, had no idea what my name was. Or like, that Breakfast with Bacon lady. Stick with that. breakfastwithbacon.com, and you will see this show. You can find the amazing guests that God has sent me, so that we can get his stories all around the world. As you remember in the gospel, it says your job is to go out and spread the gospel to all the ends of the earth. And that means you too, you watching, even if you're, a paraplegic and you can't go anywhere, you can always use your voice, you can share, you can pray to get the gospel to all the ends of the earth. And using someone like Padre Pio is one of those ways. You can't save the whole world, but you can save your little slice. So do your part. Follow me again, going back there on social media. And I think I'm on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X, Rumble, and the places. So whatever in the show notes, if you're in one of those places, go there. But I'd be honored if you would follow me. And if you do feel so inclined to support my ministry, click in the link below to buymeacoffee.com, because this is the only way the Lord gives me to help spread his word. This is my tool. So I think I've said a lot. They want to hear more from you than me. Mary,
Yes.
do you remember how I said we ended this show? You
Oh,
got
yes.
this, right? Okay.
Sunny side up.
Okay, but you're saying it too soon, so hold
Oh,
on.
so
I'm
sorry.
Dr. Christine Bacon. You've been watching Breakfast with Bacon, and I'd like to remind you always to live your life. Now you can say it.
Sunny side up.